Yeah, hello. I'm Ben Onwukwe, and I played Stuart McKenzie in London's Burning from 1991 to 2001, a 10-year span, a whole lifetime ago. Well, it was the usual process. Like every other person who's a new performer on the block, you turn up at an audition. You get auditioned. And I didn't go through any rounds, I just turned up and had an inkling what the show was about. I happened at the time to live in Tottenham, so I had a vague knowledge that London's Burning, which had established itself as a television show out of a film in 1985 or 86, on the back of the Tottenham riots. And one of the things that emerged from the Tottenham riots was that not only were police in uniform being attacked and had a huge backlash from the rioters, but the next wave of attacks were firefighters who actually were there just to protect, save lives, put out fires. So it prompted Jack Rosenthal, the original scriptwriter, to write a drama about the camaraderie of this group of people who actually are frontline rescue workers who, commit their lives to saving people. But ironically, the conundrum was they were under attack. So it caused a bit of an interesting tension. And what he helped to do was to make people aware of what those guys do, those guys in blue uniforms that turn up with the yellow helmet, like the UN forces or something, who, it's another helmeted group. But these are people in our urban areas, our country areas, our rural areas, who live in that hut with red doors and sneak out from time to time in red engines. And what they're doing is rescuing people from fires, rescuing them from floods, rescuing cats, horses, pigs, all sorts of nascent beings, sentient beings, and that's what they did. So, when I auditioned, God, it's a long way of expressing how I got the audition. I just turned up. The agent said, London's Burning want to see you. Somebody's died in it. What? Somebody's died in it? What? How does that work? No, it's one of those programs, because I'd never seen it before. And a character was going or dying or leaving or something, so they needed a replacement. So I turned up as this character called Stuart McKenzie that I knew nothing about. And I think the process was about 3/4 of an hour, just chatting, reading the scripts and whatever. And you wait around in anticipation, and then Christmas comes, you haven't heard anything, and then sort of January the 4th, I got a phone call saying, you're in. And if you want to do it, you've got to go to a training centre for 2 weeks. Training what? I've trained as an actor, my dear. No, training to look and appear competent as a fireman. So that's the story, really. And the rest is history. I did it for 10 years. And initially, you're just hired for those episodes of a series. So they've obviously, you're on probation. Like everybody's on probation when they start out as an apprentice. So I thought, oh great, 6 episodes about mainstream television drama, dream come true. Because I'd been in theatre up to then, which I am again now, but the idea of being on telly was like a fairly new concept to me. So I got the call. Yeah, my character, interestingly enough, was called Recall, which is quite ironic because I forget birthdays and pin numbers and all sorts of things, but I had to act a person who had a photographic memory. And there are, I don't know, 1 in 100,000 people that have that ability just to take some data and it's just in there. It's great for actors because then I know there are a few actors I've met over my career who can just look at, I think Judi Dench's one, incidentally, who can just look at a script and almost memorise it on sight. I can't do that. I have to do the you know, the heavy lifting to do that. But I was called Recall because my character had a photographic memory, which is pretty useful for a firefighter. Do you want to know how I had to demonstrate it? I had to demonstrate it was actually the first scene I ever shot, actually. My first scene wasn't jumping out of a fire engine or going down a pole or doing all the things that a firefighter is supposed to do. My first scene was in a locker room, the locker room, and reading, I think the character was called Katie. Somebody said, here, read Katie's book. Okay, any page, and scan it and then see if you can regurgitate it. And that's what I had to do. So I had to learn a whole paragraph of a book. And it was a very steamy kind of Jilly Cooper type of book. Steamy, sexy, heavy. So it kind of reflected on Kate's taste in literature and demonstrated Recall's powers of memory. Well, you know, to be truthful, after doing my 2 weeks at the training centre in Southwark, because in those days all the young firefighter recruits are sent there for, I don't know, a 20-week course or something, we had to do a truncated 2-week one where we just got the basic drill about going down a pole, how to use a hose, where you sit and how you sit in the fire engine, all the stuff, how to wear the uniform and the drills that you have to go through, and how to, that was the biggest test for you, for somebody like me, who's moderately agoraphobic, don't like confined spaces. I had to do the rat run, which is wearing all that breathing apparatus, going down a darkened pit and moving along a darkened corridor, which is knee-deep in water, and finding the other end and getting up again. In that way you are tested in your ability to cope with that kind of environment and rescue somebody that might be trapped there and make your way up. And you've got so you think this is how mine sounded, because I was nervous. But once you've done it once, you kind of know what to anticipate. So that was my most nerve-wracking induction into the process. So I think, I don't think I used it in the first episode that I did, but by the second one, we had to go into a smoky environment and I had to wear that wretched thing. And, you know, as people know, when you're working on a program, you find you're wearing it 30 times as long as a real firefighter would. You know, it's in and out, another setup, another setup, and checking that you've got enough gas in it. And we had firefighters around that were making sure that there was enough oxygen still in your tank, because you'd probably be wearing that thing all day on an 8 to 10 hour shift, so they can get all the shots of you. And then you kind of beg, can't you use an extra to do me? No, we've got to see your eyes. We've got to see your eyes. It can't be somebody else's eyes, you know, your nose and whatever. Well, actually, you can't see my nose, it's just my eyes. But the truth is, in 99% of the instances, you had to do it yourself. I'll let you into a secret. Some other sequences I didn't have to do. If it was a long shot with people spraying water, I could go and sit on the bench there and have a nice cup of tea, while a real firefighter made it look easy. And then I'd come in for the close-up, and then I'd go, oh God, what did he do? Oh, that's what he did, he held the hose like that. Yes, and he looked earnestly into the flames and at the source of the fire. And then cut, you go away and back to the long shot with the real fireman. So that's one of the tricks of the trade. Real firefighters were at our beck and call all day long, because as you probably know, we used Dockhead Fire Station, a real working fire station, which to this day I feel grateful for, because there was no way, as we were working throughout that period, that we were going to get it wrong. Because even if we tripped up and did something slightly wrong or slightly inappropriate or incorrect or unorthodox, they were on it immediately. No, 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 you wouldn't do that. Would not do that. No, 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 no. You don't pick it up like that. You pick it up like this. You roll out that hose like this if you want pure efficiency. So we were very lucky. We were charmed in that respect, because there was even senior officers about that were advising the director and assistant director about what was possible and what was plausible. We took liberties occasionally, because there's some things that we showed firefighters wouldn't do. You know, there's like a pause before you enter a burning building, but we never did that. We went straight in, which, you know, in the orthodox way would not be true. We hit it off really well, actually. I think she was introduced to me a month into the job, because I didn't do any kind of domestic scenes in the first episode, I don't think. But I got to know her very well. And we managed to fashion this relationship, which meant that there was a kind of tension. That was the good thing about the whole program. It sort of explored marital tension, when that phrase, I never heard it before, married to the job. A lot, these guys and women are married to the job, in inverted commas, which means their ultimate commitment is saving lives, being a good officer in the fire brigade, and that often caused tension with home life. And what aggravated it in their situation is that they had one child that had cystic fibrosis. So of course her life was often overwhelmingly depressed by the fact that we had a child to care for, and he would go off and save other people's children's lives, whereas what about our kid? So that was an ongoing tension that happened in the McKenzie household, which I think Ona and I captured very well. Ona was great. We were about the same age, which was fortunate, and we'd come from the same sort of background in theatre, so we were new to telly. I think she was a bit more experienced than me, actually, so she could give me some tips of, you know, camera angles, where to look, you know, how to cheat, you know, looking at each other, etc. So she was very great help to me, and like everything else, you're sad to see your fellow performer go. And then sadly they separated. She took the children off, didn't she? Went back to Scotland. She was Scottish in real life, which was one of the puzzlements to me. I was Scottish, was I? But Stuart McKenzie, even though he was a Londoner, must have wound up with a Scottish wife with a Scottish name. How did that happen? Yes, goodness me, I bumped into one of the boys about 2 years ago on a train platform shortly after lockdown, and this guy was 6'5", but in those days there were two little squirts from Islington, brothers in real life, but they were adorable to work for. I think their father was a mechanic, so I met him over the years, and their mum. It was lovely working with them, because I'll never forget the boy who's played the cystic fibrosis fellow, whose name I can't remember now, but it'll come back to me. But he had such wonderful doughy eyes, unforgettable sort of eyes that melted your heart. In fact, it was very hard for me to do scenes when I had to play opposite the little boy, and then I'm having to look down at him looking, and it's almost brought a tear to my eye just looking at his eyes, you know. And some children have that ability to melt your heart without doing much, just being present and being doe-eyed and appealing, you know, like a little Oliver, a little brown Oliver. So they were adorable. They were real brothers, and I think that the elder boy now is a computer programmer, I think. So neither of them followed their father's footsteps. Scream father's footsteps, in any way. You've got me completely. You've blindsided me. I had no recall of that episode. I have no recall of that. But it's now coming back to me. Eldest son goes missing. He's 12 or 13. The anxiety that invades a household, and we read about these stories every day. In fact, I passed a poster only yesterday in a bus stop in my area. This child has been missing for 6 weeks. Please call a number, and the police are onto it. Missing persons lists, and that's what we had to do with our boy. That's exactly what we had to do. I just remember it. Well, God, I'm one of these people. I'm sharing this with you, my London's burning army. That when I was 16, I ran away from home. I ran away in sort of dissatisfaction and a lack of what's the word, at home, lack of engagement with my household situation. I wanted an escape, and I went hitchhiking. Does anybody know what hitchhiking is anymore? They know the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but hitchhiking was this way of travel that young people did, that you just went on a motorway and just stuck your thumb out and went anywhere. Usually put a sign up saying Bristol. Not rude, but Bristol, because that was your destination, you thought. Anyway, I did this at 16 and caused a lot of anxiety to my family, because for 24 hours they had no way. And this was pre-mobile phone days. And that was one of the interesting things about London's Burning, is that it started in the pre-mobile phone age, where it was all hunting a call box to get any communication. And yes, the anxiety, I knew what that anxiety was, because when I finally returned home about a week later, I remember the kind of drained expression that my mother and stepfather had, the anxiety of not knowing where the kid is, and there was no way of contacting, and I wasn't going to make any contact. And I made a return. I think I was found somewhere, or I gave myself up like an outlaw. I gave myself up to a police station somewhere, and I was put back in contact with my home. And I suspect that the storyline we had was kind of similar. He'd gone out of a sense of desperation and lack of attention, and feeling a bit underappreciated. Whatever that teenagers feel. I mean, I can describe it for me, but I'm not quite sure what the young boy was meant to have felt, but I understood. And I understood from having to play it what the effect it has on that parent. Because you look to yourself and say, what have I done wrong? Am I underappreciating this human being that I've given birth to, etc. So yeah, he was found at another fire station, looking plaintive. Reunited, but it didn't keep us together. I think Recall, interestingly enough, had 2 tribunals in his tenure on the job. One was with Pitbull and a racial tension issue, where I think they came to blows, which is thoroughly unprofessional. And again, he faced a tribunal for defending his right and not to be racially abused. And I think the tribunal determined that he should be reinstated on that one. But the hotel fire one was another interesting one, where a hotel manager, I think it was, who came into conflict with the way the fire brigade were dealing with this situation, when he had, and I think he hadn't paid insurance or something. He was a dodgy hotelier in the first place, which thank goodness helped my case. But he also accused Recall of assaulting him, whereas it turned out in the end, when all the investigation and evidence was put together, that the character despite, and as well as being a crooked hotelier, also had fabricated this assault and had actually tripped, and some witnesses came forward to corroborate this. So thankfully, Recall was exonerated once more. But I guess these things happen all the time, you know, that in the heat of the moment, in the heat of the moment, in the heat of the night, there are moments where there's intense pressure to get it right and get in quick and do what needs to be done to save lives, because that's of the essence in the job. Some things can go wrong, accidents can happen, somebody falls, a trip, or your hose. I mean, there could be, I don't think we've ever done this story, where a hose, you imagine the jet of water coming out that hose, is pretty intense. It's like having a punch, I would imagine. There could be a moment where that accidentally hit somebody. We didn't do that storyline, and that would be an interesting one, because again, there would be the tension of, were you doing the right thing? Because you are aiming your jet of water, which is, I don't know, 1,000 tons per second or whatever, at the fire. But what if somebody is just behind the fire, unseen by you, and you give them a blow to the chest or to the face and injure them? You know, that also would lead to a court case. And I hope in that instant the accidental aspect would be highlighted. But who knows? I mean, the extra added dimension to a storyline could be this firefighter could be in conflict with that fella and use it as a cover for getting revenge. But hey, I'm going into territories if I'm a writer. But in that particular storyline, I think the right outcome was reached. And interestingly enough, many of the other guys have probably said this. I don't know whether you've spoken to any of the writers, but most of the storylines came from real life events in the great vast panoply of fire brigade lore, legend. Some were stretched, obviously, from the truth to make it more impactful for the screen. But in essence, they were all stories that were told to the writers, garnered from fire stations around the land. So, you know, if we did ones with animals, for example, that was usually a story that was truthful. I think cats up trees, standard. But I think there must have been stories out there where hotels with dodgy licensees and they came into conflict with the fire brigade would have happened. And we just stretched that storyline to its logical conclusion. Firefighter doing his job versus dodgy hotelier landlord who wants to find a reason to get out of facing up to the fact that he's corrupt. End of. Yeah, and there's another thing that I wanted to bring up. I don't know whether any of you as an audience remember the word yuppies. One of the interesting issues that was raised in the programme, because we lived under Thatcher in those days, Margaret Thatcher, do you remember her? The Iron Lady. There was the rise of yuppieism, and that was another interesting subsidiary storyline, was the development of that part of London to luxury accommodations. So a different class of person who had loads of money were infiltrating and starting to get rather expensive properties quite near the location of was it Blackwall? And there was a few storylines about the conflict that resonated there, because they didn't like the noise of what all that sirening that you do every so often, and running around in fire engines and causing so much disturbance to us yuppies who've got a £500,000 apartment there. Don't you know? We've got double glazing, but it's not enough to prevent you destroying our lives. We're stockbrokers, you see, and we need our privacy and quiet. So that was an interesting tension. Those guys are doing their job in an old Victorian fire station. Luxury apartments are springing up all around them. what are they meant to do? Turn on the sirens on mute for your benefit. All these tensions. I think it came to blows in one episode. I think one chap had a real barney with the station officer, I seem to recall, and it's like, God, what can you do? You know, you can't win. Yeah, that's a really good question, and everybody in the long-running series hits a wall when you say, given the choice, I'll go. I mean, I'd done 9-10 years, and like everybody else, you start getting itchy feet. You start thinking, am I going to be the Ken Barlow of of the sirens? But in that instance, looking back towards the end of its tenure, ratings were going down. The cost of the program was escalating because they had, you know, one of the things about it got bigger and bigger debacles and infernos to do, which costs, because they tended to be night shoots and a lot of technical stuff thrown in, which costs. And I think LWT revenues were falling, and it wasn't able to cover the costs. So I think it was put to some of us as elders, this would be a good time to go, because that will lower the costs, and ratings have gone down from 16 million to 10-12 million, you know, and the revenues from advertising is not justifying. So to cut long story short, it was a bit of both. It was offered to me and I took it. I think I'm happy to go now. Like all of us, at some point we're thinking, this, you know, it's like graduating after my 10 years. So as much as I knew I was going to miss my colleagues that have been my work colleagues for 10 years, you know, it was time to go. And the last episode was a nice dramatic heart attack, so you know, it was an interesting way to go. Do you know what? It was such a delight. I don't know if any of the other guys have said, "Oh God, I hated every minute of it." Actually, it was actually great to see everybody every day. You know, the different quirks of our different personalities, exaggerated or altered for the characterization. You know, some of us as actors were cast because we were sort of similar to the character that they were looking to portray on screen. You know, for example, Sick Note, who's a rather formal, elegant chap, you know, to look at, a bit ill-suited to the fire brigade, but incredibly conscientious. That's the lovely Richard. Who else can I think of? Stephen North, who played Colin Parrish, thank you very much, who was a slightly inept young raw recruit who got everything wrong but was incredibly charming and sort of a bit gullible and naive. And he had a kind of sweet naivety about him as well. He's not like that really in true life, but he could inhabit that with such ease, because you looked at him, are you getting what I'm saying? You don't do it like that. Oh, really? Oh, I thought you did. That was another pleasure to witness. I've got to tell you another thing. He loved to eat. He loved to eat, and one of the strictures of doing a canteen scene, the mess scene, what a mess they were, was that you would have whatever it is, your plate of egg and chips and beans at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it's still in front of you at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, that same meal that had to be tarted up for close-ups, so an extra chip was put on it, or they'd put on a few more beans, or have to mess around the plate. But inevitably you were just stuck with that plate of food all day long. But would you know it, Stephen North was good at just chomping away on camera. He'd demolish it all and they'd have to replenish it. So by the time the 8 hours was up, he'd be like, "Oh God, I can't take it anymore. I've had 5 plates of this stuff. Can I cheat it?" Yes, you could have done that all day long, Stephen. You could have just pretended to eat the beans. But that's how committed he was to playing the part, which was adorable. The rest of us would just poke around and push the bean around the plate and just wait for the camera to be on somebody else before you put something in your mouth. But he was happy to put it right in his mouth like that. So yeah, yeah, that's the sort of thing you miss. The camaraderie and the different characters that we all had to portray. Yeah, so you asking me about costume and makeup? Well, look at me. I didn't need makeup. I don't think any of the guys did, frankly. And there's something, because it was shot on 16mm, there wasn't a necessity to do that whole kind of makeup thing. But injuries and stuff, we had to have a crack team to create the scars and the bruises and stage blood. I can't remember if Recall ever had to. I don't think he did he? I don't think I ever got injured on the job. I had heart attacks and that, got the ticket trouble, but never any, visual makeup requirements. And I hated my costume. That's where Recall and Ben diverge. He was always dressed in rather dowdy sort of cardigans and parkas and stuff, which I don't do. So their costume choices were very specific to that character, that sort of cuddly, approaching middle-aged father, a dedicated fireman. And of course we liked wearing the fire brigade's uniform. In fact, I still got one in my loft. So if anybody wants to have pictures of me, just get in touch. One of the most colourful moments of my tenure was visits from the great Supremo Paul Knight. Paul Knight was the man who was a Supremo producer of mainstream television, which explored camaraderie and workplace drama and the connection between teams of people. Robin Sherwood's an example, Robin Hood. But he brought all that into the world of the fire brigade thanks to the Jack Rosenthal film. And his visits to the set were infrequent, but they were colourful, because he'd turn up and sort of congratulate us on the great work we're doing. Lovely boys, you're my family. And he'd take us all out for supper. It was like a big grand banquet, because he loved us all. And that was the sort of character he was. That was always a fond memory. Oh, Paul Knight's coming. Oh dear, all right. Get yourself ready. Or he's taking us to Groucho's, which was always quite fun. Yeah, so I was waxing lyrical about the great Paul Knight, whose memorial I was at last September, because he passed away around about lockdown time. Do you remember that period of lockdown where tumbleweed just blew around the country and people passed away, and you couldn't go to a funeral, you couldn't meet to pay your respects. But his son hosted a fantastic memorial last year. That was the first time that a good proportion of us had a reunion, which was lovely, and it was to celebrate the passing of the great Paul Knight. So I'll just bring that up because he was such a avuncular, gregarious, generous man, full of insight and kindness. And I owe getting into it to Paul Knight, even though we had tensions with him, because there's always tense negotiations over salary. But that's the same in all walks of life, but particularly in the film and television industry. So that tension always flared up once a year, but we loved it. The cat and mouse going, no, we're giving you 10% this year. Oh no, 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 that's not enough. All right, we'll go a little more. We'll go 12%. You know, it would be like a whole negotiation round that just did your head in, but you kind of look forward to it. So I'll miss Paul Knight, and we all do. You know, it was an era of television when there was only 3 channels. It's hard for people to understand that now. Only people of a certain age understand that. 4 channels was a big thing when Channel 4 arrived. So things like London's Burning was so important in the schedule. It became the focus of people's lives. Now we've got streaming. You can stream. There's an endless stream of stuff that your choice is like going into a library. There was no choice. It was just down to those channels. And what ITV were pumping out was hard-hitting drama. There were so many TV dramas then that, you know, really, I mean, I think we were on at the same time as Soldier Soldier, for example, which explored the camaraderie of guys in the military. And we were the ones, and there was The Bill, of course, which I popped up in numerous times. But London's Burning was the only programme about firefighters, and explore and expose the mystery of those red doors and open them up so people could see what they do, how they do it, why they do it, and the incredible camaraderie that that focus on saving lives does to people, what those kind of humans are like. So I'll treasure that fact, you know. And this was when I was in my 20s. I got that audition for Dr. Jonathan Miller, who I had, you know, it's like one of those people you admire so much and have no notion that you'll ever work with. And again, he was such a delightful, engaging man. And this text, which was based on Ryszard Kapuscinski's book about Emperor Haile Selassie, who had this rather eerie, palatial life, which had him hidden behind so many mystery doors, so nobody could really get to him. And what the book explored was the fact that Kapuscinski, who's quite a clever, infiltrating kind of journalist, spent months and months and months trying to actually get a meeting with the great Kapuscinski, the great Haile Selassie. And I think he did on a few occasions, but that was after going through layers and layers of diplomats and courtiers and everybody else until he finally gets to the Holy Grail. And often the meetings were rather whispered and inconsequential. So what the book showed was it was the process of getting to the throne that he found fascinating. It sort of made him more mysterious and full of mystique. Probably the richest monarch on the planet at the time, with a palace that, you know, everything was a miniature compared to. So when we did the play, which was at the Royal Court upstairs, which is a tiny theatre, 150-seater, it was just 5 actors in suits, black and white ties, black ties, and just playing the courtiers that ushered the audience in to have an audience with the emperor, who very rarely would turn up. So it was all about shadows and mirrors, and there was an actor in it, Nabil Shaban, who was a handicapped actor, wheelchair bound, who had in various instances played the emperor in his throne, so his wheelchair almost represented that throne. So we'd sort of protect him, like weaving this sort of spider's web of protection, and then reveal him to the audience, and he'd wax lyrical about peace and ending wars and finding the combination of humanity to bring the world together. And then he'd go. Then we'd be back to hide him from view. And it was a very interesting play. And I think it was a big hit at the Royal Court, and Millie got to direct it for BBC Two at the time. So we had to recreate what we'd done in the theatre in a BBC studio, which was quite a daunting transition, because when you're doing it in front of camera. So it was helpful to me to be able to understand how to, convert your performance from doing a stage display of who you are to bringing it down to the lens so they can see what you're doing and speak intimately to you. And but Jonathan Miller was a great person to work with, and I'm very sad that he passed as well in the last few years, because I went on to do another play with him at the Old Vic, which was called Andromache. Hey, Jonathan Miller, R.I.P. Well, it's funny you should say that. If you'd like to point your camera at that, Peter Saunders, impresario. He's the person who originally put on The Mousetrap, Agatha Christie's play in the West End. There it is, there's Peter Saunders. And back to me. I'm currently in it, playing Major Metcalf. So, it's like a nexus from being Recall. 30 years later, I'm Major Metcalf in The Mousetrap. That's how this just industry works. You'll be one thing one day and another thing tomorrow. My last job, just before joining the cast at the St Martin's Theatre, was I played horse in the Full Monty, which has just toured the country for 9 months. So again, I'm showing versatility, shall we say. So I'm happy to be here. So this is a beautiful theatre, and I urge you, if you are watching this in the next 6 months, come and see The Mousetrap. But you're sworn to secrecy if you do, not to tell anybody who done it. No, thank you. It's been a wonderful experience going down memory lane and thinking, my goodness, how much of this can I remember? But it all came flooding back thanks to you. Cheers.